UNCTAD's Compendium on achieving the Sustainable Development Goals in the least developed countries. It's a great pleasure to have with us today United Nations Deputy Secretary-General Amina J. Mohammed and UNCTAD Secretary-General Mukisa Kituyi. While neither of them really needs any introduction, I'd just like to underline that our guest, the Deputy Secretary-General, knows sustainability inside out, of course having been Nigeria's Environment Minister and previously serving as Special Advisor to the then Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon, where she was instrumental in bringing about the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, including the Sustainable Development Goals. So I'd now like to invite the Deputy Secretary-General and then Secretary-General Kituyi to say a few words about the publication and the issues that it spotlights before we take your questions.
General, ladies and gentlemen, members of the press, thank you very much for showing up. The exercise that we are witnessing, the Deputy Secretary General Amina preside, is an exercise that we think talks to a core issue in arriving at Sustainable Development Goals. We at UNCTAD have always believed that the battle for success in realizing Agenda 2030 will be won or lost in the LDCs. We've just come from a function where we're emphasizing the fact that while they are 13% of the global population, they account for 54% of the global lack of electricity, or households without electricity. And indeed, if you look at the 169 Sustainable Development Goal targets, 18 explicitly refer to LDCs. And on the basis of this, clear work on advising policy initiatives to LDC governments will be an important way of delivering with impact our normative strength in assisting realize the goals of sustainability. It is true that donors and international partners have a role to play, but at the end of the day, policy approaches that will lead to building productive capacity and structural transformation for LDC economies will fundamentally be public policies domestically embraced and initiated by the governments. So what we do here is to look at a history of UNCTAD's work in LDCs for the past 14 years and try to summarize the policy content that is relevant to the SDG agenda in a compendium that is user-friendly, non-technical language. Many times, sometimes we get lost in our UN language, and we were rudely reminded about that earlier today by the Cardinal when we were talking our own vocabulary. And so this book attempts in very straightforward, normal language to set out the policy options as a small mini-market into which LDC policymakers can engage, not only to identify their priorities, but to have a clear policy set of ideas which they can take to the field, which they can take to dialogue with development partners, and which they can try to translate into bankable projects. And I'm very, very happy on behalf of the organization, first to receive you, Madam Deputy Secretary General, and Ramadan Mubarak. To this launch, but also to appreciate my members of staff, the Division on LDC and African Special Programs, for this exemplary leadership, which I hope will inspire others to develop similar compendia with actionable ideas that can enrich the policy interface between thought leadership and policy making. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us, members of the press, and I'm really happy, Dr. Kituyi, with you and your team to proudly launch what is an incredibly valuable tool. I would say 5 years ago, as we began the process of shaping the SDGs, one of the biggest challenges we had was trying to explain in a policy environment how they all came together, and that you didn't goal them and take one that was lined up to your mandate and just run with that, and in the end not attain the spirit of the Agenda 2030. So this is very valuable. It's a tool that I would say is a touchstone for what we would like to do in 47 countries that already have capacity issues. To put that into one compendium allows them to have reference material that can help, again, revise, shape policies, but also give us a equal, I would say, playing field for when we come to discuss how you inform the support from the UN system itself and the many partners that we will be requiring to move with. The reforms in the recent approval of the development reforms by member states in the United Nations will go a long way to picking up tools like this to make the change that we need. We need to come out of the boxes that we've been in. It is not just about the United Nations. We've also created an environment where everyone's in a silo. So for us to say we're coming out of the silo, what are we going to do with our partners in governments, in parliaments, in civil society? This, I think, really provides us a very good way of broaching that and speaks, as Dr. Kitiyu said, in a language that everyone understands. In a language that the private sector can come to the table and that civil society can understand how they would engage, and parliaments making that informed decision behind executive priorities of a government. It also helps, I believe, for places like Geneva and Rome and Bonn and Paris, New York, where we have various parts of our member states dealing with specific issues and how they would integrate into this agenda. This, as it relates to LDCs, what I would say now is that it'll be Olivia Twist and ask for one for all countries, because this deals with LDCs and it is a priority. But I think this is going to help when we speak to the rights agenda, when we start to talk about the humanitarian piece, how the context of many things can be better supported by this compendium. It would also, I would say, just coming out of Istanbul, launching the Technology Bank, the first of the SDG targets to be achieved. This also would provide an enormous amount of support that will link the technology bank's work with what happens in the 47 LDCs. So very much welcome it, and I'm sure that I'm going to be using it probably more than you, Dr. Kitiyu. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed to both of you. So we'll go straight to questions now. If you would be kind enough to introduce yourself and name your media.
Laurent Siro, Swiss News Agency. Two questions here to the Deputy Secretary General. The first one would be, what issue can you identify now as the main one that might prevent LDCs to be able to reach the SDG? And the second one, among the LDCs, there are countries like South Sudan or Myanmar that are facing either troubles or conflicts, and Bangladesh that is facing a huge refugee crisis. Here again, what kind of issue do you see in these conflicts and the big troubles like the refugee crisis in order for LDCs to tackle the SDGs? And do you have a particular message in that regard to send to the government of Myanmar? Because this morning, UN has just signed an agreement with the government of Myanmar that will probably grant access to the country.
That we would have to address would be, getting the finance mix right for LDCs. It is not sufficient ODA to get to the scale of the kind of transformations we want to see in these countries. When we see what UNCTAD has done in terms of its analysis, the kind of infrastructure that needs to be laid down, the huge sums of money that we are speaking about, it will need us to look at some kind of finance mix, and finding a way to leverage the different sources of finances that are available, but somehow there's a list of things that maybe the private sector or investors would say are risks in a country, and how to de-risk that and to get that right. And that against some of the major spends that need to happen, which lay foundations for development, and apparent between goals 7 and 15 as we try to jumpstart many economies or scale up their growth that ensures that they are inclusive. In the question to countries that have challenges such as South Sudan, and Myanmar, very different challenges, incidentally. In South Sudan, I think what we have done as an international community was really fail the day after peace. So we really lost a number of those gains, and we will struggle, to try to get that done in the near future. And so as part of the SG's prevention vision, what we've done is to put together a platform that builds on the new way of working. It's the Joint Steering Committee on Humanitarian and Development Nexus, where we bring the knowledge and the practice of what's happening in the humanitarian environment as we try to get that peace-building bridge across to development and to nurture that. More specifically, the spotlight's been put, not to the exclusion of others, but it has been put on places like the Sahel, the Horn of Africa, DRC, Afghanistan, right this minute, because we see the possibility of achieving solutions, even though difficult environment, but the political context is much easier than Sudan, which is still trying to find that breakthrough. In the case of Myanmar and Bangladesh, again, many countries that are bearing the brunt of crises in other countries need equal, if not more, support, because as you see, really, quite frankly, what we see, the number of refugees that have come across the border from Myanmar into Bangladesh is horrendous. It's almost from the fire into the frying pan. And we have to try to do something about those environments to improve them on the humanitarian side, but find that pathway back to engaging with the government so that we can find that safe and orderly return to Myanmar. The agreement that we signed is a baby step. And I think that, the most important thing is that we keep engaged. We have a new envoy there. We have our agencies on the development side and the humanitarian side. And I think engagement is key to ensuring that people, we can see an end to the suffering and that we can try to address many of the challenges that we have in front of us. Maybe I just add to that. We deal with conflict and the arena of where the crisis is. One of the things that we're looking at is that even in a country where there is so much crisis, there are islands of stability. And how can we move there and make investments that could spread that more broadly? We see that in places like Mali, in DRC. It is not the whole country that is up in conflict. And so there are areas there that we would look to see how can we look at that differently.
Thank you. Next question, please. Any more questions? Laurent, you have a follow-up?
Yeah, your last remark was... I was just wondering whether your last sentence was also applied to the situation in Myanmar. You say we have to find ways to help them expanding their economic development, even if there are regions where the refugees still come and that have been destroyed by the violences?
Yes, I do. I believe that we can't leave a whole country because this is about people. We are in very, very difficult circumstances, and at one point there was no engagement. And I think we have to get that back and continue on a parallel process of trying to right some of the wrongs and also trying to address what is clearly development issues in that country as well. Now, our teams and agencies and funds and programs have been there for many, many years, and they continue to do good work. And I think that this is important, that we don't lose the value of what we bring to many in Myanmar that are benefiting from that. But we do have to put a focus on the two.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else? Another question? Final call? Okay, thank you very much indeed for coming.
Thank you very much.